What we're going to do here, and I'm going to be about 45 minutes, and then Ron has some things to share, and some other people I think have some things to share, and then our day will be finished. But what I want to do is kind of mix it a bit, and instead of showing you the film first, we're going to look at the propaganda. The last section of this film has to do with World War II and the Holocaust. And in some ways, I think I see this last section the same way I see the third floor of the Holocaust Museum's permanent exhibition. On the fourth floor, you see all of the history. You see those seeds that were there in the 30s. And in the third floor, where it's ghettoization and camps, we see what I call the human impact of all that we're learning about on the fourth floor. And so this last section is it's about the racial education, it's about the war itself. And that section of film is about 12 and a half minutes. So we're going to take about 15, 20 minutes, we're going to look at some images, we're going to watch that last section of the film, and then I have a podcast, which will be a little bit boring and hopefully you won't fall asleep, but you may be aware that the museum has a podcast on anti-Semitism. And one of those podcasts, which is 8.5 minutes long, is on propaganda. And there is a direct link, I'll show it to you on this stuff with the Learning Lab, but I think it might be good. It's contemporary voices talking about propaganda. And so that's kind of where we're going. I hope you don't mind being on my journey. Okay, now we are in the war years. As you all know, the war started September 1st, 1939. You may or may not be aware that the German public in newspapers was told that it was a defensive action to go into Poland because the Poles had invaded Germany. We had evidence of that in State of Deception, where the newspaper articles assuring the German people that this was a defensive war. They had actually had people, maybe soldiers, I don't know, dressed as Polish military attack. And in the same way that the Herschel Greenspan propaganda was used to foment the pogrom at Kristallnacht. Basically, they did the same thing at the start of World War II. Now, one little prelude that you may or may not know, but I think is relative to what we've been talking about all morning. In August of 1939, a month before the war actually broke out, is when Hitler... Hitler did not do this, but there was an order that went out from the health ministry that any child born with a series of impairments, all right, and there was this list of impairments. Any child born with any of those was to be simply their name sent to the office, and each midwife or nurse would get 2 Reichmarks for every child's name they submitted. Now, is there anything wrong with that? It's an edict that goes out. If you're a midwife, you're a nurse, you're a doctor, the child is born with one of these maladies, all you have to do is turn in their name to the office, right? So on the surface, that seems, right, not that bad, right? I mean, I will share with you one tour I did, and I was talking about this with the people on the tour, and a gentleman said, well, my son has severe autism, and yes, I think severe autism is something. And he said, so I had to register my son, and he said, we get all sorts of public services because the severity of his malady. And of course, precisely the opposite is what happened under the Nazis. Because we all can guess that they didn't want those names so they could give services to these children. That nothing at that moment happened. Then the war breaks out in September 1st, 39. October 1st of 39, backdated to September 1st, was the infamous euthanasia order. That's one of the very few things that at least our museum has that had Hitler's signature. And in that, it says that anyone with any of these maladies, mental or physical, would be basically taken out of their misery and given a mercy killing. That was then, after that, as you probably know, that the killing centers for the mentally and physically handicapped and the euthanasia program were established in mental hospitals in Germany. They were all in Germany. The killing centers were all in Poland, but those euthanasia centers were all in Germany. They were underground, pretty much. There was an archbishop who spoke out in 42. That's a whole other issue because he was Catholic. Nothing happened to him when he lamented all of this going on. But what happened with it is that they pulled back a little bit on the euthanasia program. But if you know your history in this time, 1942, the first killing center had opened up in December in Helmo of 1941. And they were starting to need very efficient ways to really do mass murder. Now, they had also begun, under the aegis of the euthanasia program, a child euthanasia program. Guess where they got the names? Of course, right? They already had names, right? So the child and adult euthanasia program stopped a little bit, was not quite as active, and as they were ramping up for getting those killing centers in Poland, they actually took doctors and others from the euthanasia center killing sites to the killing centers, okay? So there's a big entanglement there that I think sometimes people don't understand. That they were using gassing some in the euthanasia centers, but more it was horribly things like starvation shots and that kind of thing. But we do, and this came out in Deadly Medicine, the exhibition that we had a number of years ago now, photographs of doctors and nurses in, I think it was in Hadamar, euthanasia facility, when the 1,000th patient was euthanized. We have pictures of them celebrating with cake and champagne. Yeah, these are medical people, and they were celebrating the 1,000th victim. Okay? Now that's happening once the war has started. Okay, it didn't happen before that. It's happening during the war. So you have the war against the Jews, you know, as we know that very well. You have this incredible military war that they're fighting all over the place. And so what I want to do, I just have about 4 images here. But one of the things that I'd like us to think about is, how do you enlist people in a war effort? I mean, we've had war efforts in this country in my lifetime that sure didn't enlist people's enthusiasm very much, right? So how do you do that? What kinds of emphasis do you have to do? Well, this is a 1940 poster, Why We Fight for Our Children's Bread. What's being appealed to here? Why we fight for our children's bread. Yes, sir. Survival, yes. Remember the whole emphasis on children in the 30s, right? And children, the emphasis on family. And so if you want support, well, maybe you don't want to focus on the bullets, right? You want to focus on we have to fight because otherwise our children are going to die. Okay? This, which is a much more militaristic one, victory belongs to our flag, is, notice that 38 to 44, but certainly probably in the 40s. And you're all kind of fading on me, I can tell, because lunch and now it's after. But you may fall asleep in the film, but I won't even be up here then. I mean, I'll be there. But so what do we see here? All right, there we saw we need to fight to give our children food. Here, victory belongs to our flag. What's being appealed to? Nationalism, sure, nationalism. Look at the flags. The swastika is not totally in the front, is it? It's kind of hidden. There's that eagle. And then there is the Knight's Cross that gets much more. Why would that be? The evoking of the Knights Templar and the Greater Reich. Okay, all right. Bring back the glory and bring back the glory of the past. Yes. So in this image, look at what's forefront. That eagle, right? That sense of power.
My question is, we're spending a lot of time talking about propaganda and the amount of money that would have been invested in doing this.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they seem like Hitler won over the people and his belief. Is this where he kind of changes and maybe has more of a global outlook in trying to reach beyond Germany in terms of the spirit race? To me right now it's a little redundant because the German people have bought into it. And then you have the Wannsee Conference talking about the evacuation, he was so careful in the use of words, not exterminating but evacuating. I was just trying to get your opinion on that.
Mm-hmm. Well, no, and you're right. The euphemisms that were used seem a little odd, don't they? Why isn't he just being forthright? The only response I can give, and maybe some of you can, as to what is really going on here now that we're in the war years, is yes, he had a global vision. He wasn't going to stop with Germany, and he really did have a global vision. And so, victory, well, what's victory mean? Victory can be on and on and on and on. Yes, sir.
Well, I think also because, obviously, Hitler had the idea of having Lebensraum in the East and expanding in the East, but the way he frames the war is it's a crusade against communism, especially after the Eastern Front opened. So a lot of the propaganda is based on we're knights who are stopping these communist infidels from taking over the fatherland, and so we have to expand. We're not expanding, we're defending ourselves. It becomes everything's a defensive war because even if you're on the offensive.
I mean, in a sense, it's not our fault. We're just defending ourselves, right? That's all we're doing. Who can deny that we should be able to defend ourselves? But now we may look at it a little differently. Now two more, and then we're okay. Here, build weapons for the front. Okay. And in this, which is in 1941, so we're at the beginning of the war. He's trying to get people built up to do it. Build weapons and munitions for the front. And that the Nazi propagandists held out the threat of annihilation of German life and culture at the hands of Jewish Bolshevism if the Allies won the war. Okay, so the way to help, which in some ways, if you think about it, if people are at war and they're like, well, what can I do? Obviously, there were thousands and thousands and thousands of men fighting at the front. So who's mainly going to be building? Women. Yeah, same thing that happened in our country in World War II, right? I mean, the women then became the ones who were making the munitions while the men were being mowed down. Is this effective? Again, let's look at that. Build weapons for the front.
You've got a guy in the front with nothing, so he's defenseless if you guys don't get to work and build things.
Yeah, look at that.
He's pleading for you to help him.
Yes, and you notice he's looking straight at us, right? Straight at us. Help us, help us.
Help your own husband or help your son.
Exactly. Help your family member. Let's get these munitions built because we're in a war.
To the man in the background who is doing the same thing, so it's almost like the idea of the lines where you're passing things along and everybody's doing their part and helping out. So it's almost like the person looking is the participant.
It's a very interesting observation. Yeah, everybody else is doing their part here and they're under fire. Why aren't we doing that? Or you doing that? And the final one, which is one of those ugly ones, but I think we have to, maybe with the posters, the mantra that we saw. This is about 1942. The ones that come later, by the way, are things to fortify the cities. They tend to be much more about the war. And we've got to win the city. We've got to keep the city. We can't have the city fall. But this one is fascinating, and many of you may have seen it before. But what are the elements here that show us that the Jew is the enemy?
He's hiding behind his country's flag.
And whose flags? So he's behind, okay?
It almost looks like Churchill in the shape and
It what?
it looks like Churchill with the bowler hat, except not facially, but
Right.
and a half.
But the typical caricature is there. The obvious Star of David, I mean, there's, you know, not only is it in the title on the poster, it's on his being, okay? And this one is really quite a famous one, with this idea that the Jews were really reinforcing the idea that we heard about before, that the Jews are behind it. You know, the Jews are the ones who are the cause of all this.
It's also too that they're wealthy, because I know that a lot in the Polish, I think it's called shuttels, they weren't wealthy, and they weren't that stereotypical, but it's all the Jewish people, Jewish community are greedy.
Mm-hmm.
And look how well dressed he is. So these greedy, well-dressed people are hiding behind our enemy type
Yes.
look.
Yeah. Okay? All right. Now, are you up for 12 minutes to finish this out? Okay.
As the Nazi regime implemented its long-standing goal of territorial expansion, aggression against Germany's neighbors initially succeeded without encountering armed resistance. Hitler counted on the reluctance of Britain and Europe to intervene for fear of another war. The German occupation of Prague, capital of Czechoslovakia, left no doubt as to Germany's intent on military conquest in Eastern Europe. On September 1st, 1939, a massive German force invaded and conquered Poland within a month. It was the start of the Second World War. In April 1940, Germany occupied Denmark and Norway. In May, the German armed forces attacked France, the Netherlands, Luxembourg, and Belgium. In June, Paris fell, and France surrendered. The swift and unexpected victory over France avenged Germany's defeat and humiliation in the First World War. It propelled Hitler to a new level of popularity and trust among the German people. In June 1941, the German army, with more than 3 million soldiers, invaded the Soviet Union to wage a war of annihilation that targeted tens of millions of civilians. Under conditions of war and military occupation, the Nazi regime could pursue its political and racial goals with more radical measures. As German troops advanced into Eastern Europe, Germany's power extended over millions more Jewish inhabitants in the occupied lands, where German authorities could exploit existing anti-Jewish attitudes among local populations. Across Eastern Europe, German authorities forced those identified as Jews into tightly packed areas called ghettos. Separated from the non-Jewish population, Jews in the larger ghettos were imprisoned behind brick walls and barbed wire. The German drive eastward was cast as a crusade against Judaism and communism. In the Nazi view, two aspects of the same evil. German soldiers and police officials treated Soviet prisoners of war as subhumans, either shooting them or deliberately causing their deaths by exposure to the elements and by starvation. Millions died in German captivity. On the Eastern Front, racial political instruction was part of regular training for all types of German occupation forces. SS Chief Heinrich Himmler referred to the war against the Soviet Union in an address to his men. This invasion is an ideological battle and a struggle of races. Here in this struggle stands National Socialism, an ideology based on the value of our Germanic Nordic blood. On the other side stands a population of 180 million, a mixture of races whose very names are unpronounceable and whose physique is such that one can shoot them down without pity and compassion. In July 1941, Hermann Göring, Hitler's second in command, authorized all necessary preparations for the final solution of the Jewish question in the European territory under German control. As German military forces advanced, mobile killing squads advanced with them. The German army, military SS, and German police units took an active part in authorized mass murders. The Germans and their accomplices rounded up the victims, drove them on foot or in trucks to a killing site, often made them remove their clothes, and shot them. Participants in the murders included local collaborators, especially police, in Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, Ukraine, and Belarus. The German killing squads and their auxiliaries murdered at least 2 million Jewish men, women, and children in mass shooting operations. Back in Germany, SS and police deported the remaining Jews to the occupied Eastern territories. In German-occupied Warsaw, the walled ghetto that German Jews entered as newcomers in 1942 was already a place of mass suffering due to terrible overcrowding, lack of sanitation, disease, and starvation imposed by the Germans. Despite all efforts of the imprisoned Jews to find ways of surviving and sustaining their communities, those conditions increasingly led to death for scores of thousands. Most vulnerable were the orphaned children. Originally, German occupation authorities established ghettos to concentrate Jews and separate them from the non-Jewish population. Later in the war, many ghettos served as staging grounds for the transportation of Jews to the east, euphemistically called resettlement by the Germans, who promised their captives better conditions and opportunities to work. People endured unimaginable suffering on journeys that lasted days without food, water, or toilet facilities. Many of the weak, the young, and the elderly died before reaching the destination. The Germans and their collaborators deported roughly 2.7 million Jews and others to killing centers in German-occupied Poland. At the largest of the camps, Auschwitz-Birkenau, transports arrived from all across Europe.
Transports were coming in every day. People with all kinds of different languages. Hungarian, Poles, Czechoslovakian, from Holland, from France, from Belgium, from Germany, from Italy, Russians. They were from everywhere.
My wife was somehow waving to me, and that's the last I've seen of her.
The smell, gas chambers. When I asked, when will I see my mother, I was shown the smoke. This is how I found out where she went.
It took a long time until I started to realize that we are condemned to die. All Jews are condemned to die.
Those whom the SS judged unable to work were killed, often within 2 or 3 hours of arrival. Those who could work would be used for forced labor, under punishing conditions. When they could no longer work, they too would be put to death. In several killing facilities exclusively designed to kill human beings on an industrial scale, camp authorities used poison gas to murder children, women, and men. At these killing centers, nearly half of all Holocaust victims died. The camps of Majdanek and Auschwitz were the first liberated as Soviet troops reached Poland. News of Majdanek's liberation in summer 1944 was met with disbelief. The New York Herald Tribune said, "Maybe we should wait for further corroboration. This sounds inconceivable." In April 1945, U.S. troops in Germany and Austria came upon concentration camps at Buchenwald, Dachau, Nordhausen, Mauthausen, and Ohrdruf. The soldiers saw the camps with their own eyes, and the truth was undeniable. General Dwight Eisenhower, commander of the Allied Liberating Forces, wrote, "The things I saw beggar description. The visual evidence and the verbal testimony of starvation, cruelty, and bestiality were overpowering." In American movie theaters, newsreels made witnesses of thousands more. One commentator said, "To future generations, it must be told. Once man did this to his brothers. In the 20th century, there existed a civilization which for 12 years returned to barbarism." Shock permeated the camps as liberating troops tried to grasp what they had found. Soldiers did all they could to attend to the dead and to support the living. Those who survived faced the slow task of reclaiming their dignity and returning somehow to life. The Holocaust darkened the world's view of humanity and our future. As the world struggled to understand what had happened, a new word, genocide, was needed for these crimes. Crimes committed by ordinary people from a society not unlike our own.
Oh, I guess we don't want the lights back up. We're going to watch this. I want to have us, and that's just so powerful to me, sorry. Notice now that I'm still on my Smithsonian website. Oh yeah, we don't need it back yet. Yeah, we need it. Okay, the museum has a long-standing podcast that Alicia Fishman does on propaganda. And the one that I have chosen for us to listen to, and I say it's about 8.5 minutes, and there is no video, so don't fall asleep on me. Oh, that's true. We'll keep the lights on, and really don't need that, I guess. Is on propaganda. And I obviously just went to the site based on what I have there for you on the Smithsonian site, and there is a transcription of the whole thing. Now, I don't know that that would ever make any difference to you, but why I really wanted to end with this is because it is looking at contemporary comments about propaganda. It may or may not be directly related to what went on in the Holocaust, but I think it's maybe a fitting way to end.
Welcome to Voices on Anti-Semitism, a podcast series from the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, made possible by generous support from the Elizabeth and Oliver Stanton Foundation. I'm your host, Elisa Fishman. We're surrounded by propaganda all the time. Some of it benign, some of it dangerous. Propaganda was used to devastating effect during the Holocaust, and it's worth studying to understand why and how we are vulnerable to propaganda in our everyday lives. Beginning this month, the museum's State of Deception exhibition on the power of Nazi propaganda will travel the country. Our podcast today is part of that exhibition, a collage of people, young and old, discussing their own relationship to propaganda and the ways in which they guard against it.
I'm particularly cautious about messages that seem to be geared towards me as a mother, whether it's commercial advertising or a political campaign, when it's appealing to protecting your children or doing the best for your children, and they're putting it in those very, very simple phrases. That's when I try to perk up and dig a little deeper.
Propaganda that is in agreement with what you emotionally or subconsciously believe is the one that you'll accept with the least amount of checking its credence, checking its truthfulness. When someone is saying something I so emotionally agreed with, I say, now wait a minute. I should say, now wait a minute, but I'm a human being like everyone else. Most of us will just say, that's right, that agrees with my point of view. So you go ahead and accept it right off. And then, of course, you pass it on.
The most dangerous kind of propaganda is one that turns one group of people against another, or that promotes discrimination or harm.
Turning people against one another. That's certainly the way propaganda was used by the Nazis. And unfortunately, it was very, very effective as a means for the Nazis to gain power and as a weapon.
I think the younger that you place a stereotype into a child's mind, the harder it is for them to get that stereotype out of their mind as they get older. And that was one of the things that the Nazi parties did with the education. These things were instilled in them so young. To fight against that is very hard.
When I was young in middle school at some point, I was repeating the thing that I would hear it in the street or in the news. I didn't think why the state or why the state television would lie. But you grow up, you read a lot, and you discover that the people who are in charge of media, they are humans and they do mistakes, and sometimes the way they are thinking is completely wrong.
I think in some ways propaganda is a tool. It of itself is neither hurtful or beneficial. It's kind of neutral. It's the message behind it where the harm can really come in. And the Nazi propaganda and State of Deception is kind of the same way. That's all of these very positive images. Industry, people working, people farming, traditional dances, our soldiers all marching in nice lines. And it shows the Nazi state being very strong, being very powerful, but then having the knowledge of what that actually stands for, why they want that image to go out, that's what makes the hair on the back of my neck stand out.
Young people aren't necessarily different in this way, but I think teenagers are especially vulnerable to that peer pressure thing.
And also just thinking about Nazi Germany again, there's definitely something appealing about feeling like you belong to a very strong camaraderie. And it's also easy to maybe explain your actions by saying, well, I'm part of this group.
The buck doesn't stop with you. And so you feel like even if something doesn't feel quite right, you can continue being a part of it,
But then be like, oh, I was just doing what everyone else was doing. I was just following everybody else. It wasn't my idea.
And then once you're locked into that, it's so difficult to try and be the different one, especially when you feel like there's no other option than this group, where you feel like if I step out, where do I go? There's nowhere for me to go. And I think that's a really big, even if it's not fear for your life, that fear of not having anyone you can have a relationship with anymore, I think that's really powerful.
I would think fear is a huge driving factor in propaganda. When people have something worth keeping, they tend to let things happen more. I think the government is much more able to convince the average citizen, you know what, we have to go and harm these people to keep your way of life. And I think that's largely what happened with the Holocaust.
I was born in Nazi-occupied Holland, and I lost much of my family actually in the Holocaust. I think the important message is really exactly the words that Adolf Hitler used, that the propaganda can be a terrible weapon in the hands of an expert. And the key then becomes really evaluating the message for what it is. And that's, I think, a key role of the public.
When I feel like something I'm watching or something I'm seeing is starting to make me feel like I know it wants me to feel, I start paying very close attention to the facts of what they're saying, and I start trying to pull away from like the music in the background or the images I'm seeing and try to really focus on what are they saying here and what do I know about it, and is it right, does it make sense?
Propaganda feels most sinister to me when it tries to tap into your casual, everyday networks. One of the aspects of social media is this kind of equation of voices and just the blurring of public and private lines in ways that really demands that people think carefully about the sources of information and the context of information before they then start to share it.
For propaganda to be effective, the people that are doing the promotion are banking on you not doing the research. They're hoping that you're going to be lazy and just go with it.
It's always going to be tempting to only visit the websites that you agree with. It's validating. It's also easier.
We either don't have time or don't choose to analyze things more deeply. And I think sometimes we feel like even if we did, our voice would not make a difference. Things will be okay without us.
I think it's about keeping yourself informed. You can't really control what a politician does or what someone's trying to sell you, but the more you keep yourself informed, the more you won't be susceptible to bad propaganda, and you'll be able to identify it for what it is.
The average citizen has a lot more power than we think we do.
Propaganda requires a listener. It requires a group of people to believe what the speaker is saying. And if nobody believes, then there is no propaganda. It takes for somebody to participate, for somebody to believe it, to exist.
Voices on Anti-Semitism is a podcast series of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. Join us every month to hear a new perspective on the continuing threat of anti-Semitism in our world today. We would appreciate your feedback on this series.
Okay. I think I'm done. One thing, it's like I was waiting. I do want to mention, because a couple of people mentioned to me about the two programs we have at the museum for teachers. And they're both in the summer, and one is the BELFER, B-E-L-F-E-R program. It's for teachers who have not taught about the Holocaust for more than 5 years. If you have attended BELFER, then you would be eligible to attend the Museum Teacher Fellow Program. Information about those is on the website. I didn't hook them up here. But I know a couple people in the audience have been to BELFER and had nothing but praise, and I can second that. Thank you. You have been amazing as an audience. And now we're going to turn it over to Ron, because he has some things to share with you. And do you need this, Ron? Do you need the
I don't want to hold you up. It's been a long day. We just have a couple of things. First of all, I want to again thank Carol for what I think was very enlightening. As you know, those of you who've been there and those of you who can go, the U.S. Holocaust Museum is just an incredible source of information and enlightenment and whatever else we can say about it, both in terms of what's there, but also in terms of the resources that they offer, both online. But people like Carol and others, as I said, I was there for a week last February. My colleague, Howard Timberg, was there as a Balfour, I forget, whatever, another program. He was there for 2 summers, 2 times in the summer. And so if you have a chance, I know they have programs that you mentioned, you may want to take advantage of it. In your packet, there's a closer workshop this summer. Keene State College in New Hampshire is the only program that has only college that has an undergraduate major in Holocaust and Genocide Studies. Any of your students who may want to consider majoring in a subject like this, it's a wonderful. I was there last week for a couple of days. But they have a week-long institute which they offer to middle and high school teachers. So if you have that opportunity, and either it's not very expensive, or you can get funding, check out your packet. I would highly recommend it. Again, a whole week where you can live in the dorms, go back to your. But it's also a beautiful campus, so it's worth checking out. We have a number of other things that we put in there. There's a couple. Books that are just out, maybe interested. There's also a thing called The Blue Tattoo, which is a video or DVD, whatever, that you can download for free. And so provide you with those kinds of resources, including, of course, the bags that you'll get on the way out, which is, again, things that I think the thing that we saw today, right? The DVD. Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, and then another CD, and then 2 wonderful books on property. Anyway, things. We hope to continue to do some. I talked to a few people here about follow-ups. We're having in the spring. I think we'll have a workshop that we can be offering. I'll connect with folks around that. There's an educator from Keene State, Tom White, who does workshops for middle high school teachers all over New Hampshire, and he's more than willing to come and do workshops on a number of topics. So you'll be hearing from us. We do have another conference scheduled for the March 31st on the Native American genocide, which I hope some of you will be able to participate in. It's another, sadly, this was a little different, but it was a genocide nevertheless. And sadly, the Nazis learned from that, from what we understand as a model. The same way that segregation. So we have our own burdens to deal with in our own country. But in any case, we have a number of things that we're going to be offering to the public as well as to our own staff and faculty. And the last thing, one of the things we wanted to do very briefly is if there's any best practices that anybody wanted to share, we'd be happy to have you talk about that. I want to start, though. You all saw, I hope, the stamp collection that the charter school in Foxborough have done. And so Jamie, whose last name? The woman who started it was here earlier. She had to leave, but Jamie will mention it. She just wants to talk briefly about what they do, what they have done, and what they're doing as a model for something that you may want to do something along those lines or whatever in your own school. It's amazing that high school would have happened around the country. You may have read about some programs that people have done with students and that have become even internationally famous, including the one Elena Sendler, and some of you may have heard about her. She was a Polish woman who went into the Warsaw Ghetto and saved thousands of young kids before she got caught. She was a social worker, and she was sort of forgotten, and she was rediscovered by these high school students in Kansas. They wrote a play about her, and they've been traveling the country for about 5 years now with that play about Irena Sendler. And she finally, they found she died about a year ago, but she was in an old age home, and she finally got recognized. The president of Poland, 2008. Wow, the years go by, right? But anyway, that was a wonderful thing. Yeah, as you know, there's we've had a couple of programs on Aristide Sousa Mendes, who was sort of rediscovered. He was a consul in Bordeaux, Portuguese consul, who saved over 10,000 Jews and other 10,000 others when he was told not to allow these undesirables into Portugal. He was a consul who spent weeks stamping visas so they could escape. He finally got caught by their secret police and died penniless. But again, he's considered righteous among the nations. Yeah, and there was Sukahara was a Japanese consul, and probably know about Wallenstein, who was a... So anyway, stories are endless. We, by the way, again, we have a resource center, it's small, in the second floor of our library. We have books that we're more than happy to lend out and DVDs. So if any of you are around, you want to come up, room 200A is our, we probably got some literature on it, more than happy. Or we'd be happy to come to your school and do program or work with you. So we're a resource. Okay, so let me introduce Jamie. Jamie, before you, we want to give you a little token of our appreciation with your stamps that we've collected.
Thank you.
So you can add to your collection.
That's great. I really appreciate this few minutes to talk to you. The program that we have is called the Holocaust Stamps Project. It was started in 2009 by a 5th grade teacher. Charlotte was here just a little while ago. She had to leave early. But Charlotte started this program as a community service learning project. She was inspired by the Paperclips Project. If you've heard about the Paperclips Project, they wanted to collect 6 million paper clips to visually show the children what 6 million lives might look like. Charlotte wanted to take it a step further, and she wanted to collect 11 million stamps. And that seems kind of inconceivable, but what it was able to do is to allow our children to really visualize life. We have just broken the 8 millionth stamp that we've collected yesterday. I had to total before I came to this conference today. So we have collected 8 million stamps toward the 11 million stamp goal. It's a lot of stamps. But when you think of it as stamps, it's really an amazing thing. But when you think of it as representing human beings, and each stamp commemorates a life. So the program at our school is K through 12. Our youngest students through our 12th grade all participate in this program, as well as community volunteers. It's really taken a life of its own. Charlotte started the program and had the audacity to retire. And then that is how I ended up managing the program. It's a huge project. It's become international. We have donors from all over the world sending us stamps, from an envelope of stamps this size to we received a collection of 500,000 stamps this past summer. So people send these to us. They spend hundreds of dollars mailing us boxes of stamps. And my office, if anybody wants to visit me, you will be able to see what 1 million stamps looks like just laying around. We do have a storage facility in our media center where the other 7 million are being stored. It is our goal to find a home for them eventually as one big collection. You did see, I hope you had an opportunity to see the collages that our children work on. I brought 3 collages today. Right now we have 16 either completed or in progress. The 3 that I brought today, one is from our kindergarten students that was completed in June. The dove in the very middle of the display was the very first collage completed by Charlotte's 5th grade class. And that was done about not quite 7 years ago. And then Kristallnacht, because next week is the commemoration of Kristallnacht, I brought the work of one young man who dedicated about 2 years of his free time at school to complete Kristallnacht. And he's in college now, and he actually used the collage and what he learned while doing the collage as part of his college essay. So it's a really large program. We have lots of support from the community, and we do community outreach. Some of you, I know, I've met you through our open houses, and I'm hoping that now that you know of us maybe a little bit more, that when we do have our next open house in the spring, that you will be able to attend. We've had kinder transport survivors. We've had other survivors come and speak to a completely packed house. We are K through 12, about 1,300 children, and we're a very multicultural school. So to have so many people come to see and learn about what life was like as a child in a kinder transport is really just amazing to me. There's not a whole lot of relationship there, or so I thought. It was really a great learning moment for our school and for me. Our last open house, we actually had Misha Jakowski, who is the grandson of Martha and Waitzel Sharp. And they are 2 Christians who went to Europe to rescue Jews, and they actually rescued thousands of them. So he was there and actually brought another dynamic to the learning process for our school and our program. So I'm here. If anybody would like to know a little bit more about the project, I'm going to be out near the collages. If you have any questions at all of maybe how you can become involved or start something on your own similar to what we have, just let me know. I'm happy to share. And thank you again, Ron.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, so there's all kinds of modeling could be done. Linnell Dean, who's sitting over there, is my assistant, started this idea of having a button collection. You got to collect different things, so we just started a button collection. She thinks we can collect 1 million buttons. I'm not sure, but it's another way of, sort of objectifying in a way, or making very concrete, I should say, numbers that sometimes seem abstract. Does anybody else before we want to share anything that you're doing? Everybody. All right. Again, we're very grateful for your attendance here. Make sure before you leave that you get a button, right? We'll give you a button. You get a bag, and thank you again, and we hope we'll see you.